All right, welcome in. We are here with Amy
What's
today
up?
again. And today I'm going to kind of talk through my biggest lessons from the conference that I went to over the weekend. And we did this back when I went to the conference in Dallas in the spring. I imagine that we'll do it after I go to the next conference that I'm going to in about a month. But what ends up happening for me, this is now the fifth conference I've gone to since March of last year. So in about 18 months, I've gone to five, which is a significant amount, particularly in the industry and given the fact that I have kids and it's a lot that I've gone to. I don't know if I will continue to keep up this pace of going to these because there are just logistical challenges, and I'll get to that in a minute because I think that it's actually the big takeaway. But each one of these that I've gone to, there's kind of been a theme for me throughout the weekend. And because it's very easy to go to a conference where there's 15 talks, right? A gajillion conversations, and be overwhelmed by the amount of information. And everybody's got a different strategy, right? So this was a fitness business conference. So there were 7 talks on this is how you grow your business, right? And so you could pull from any of those 7 talks 6 to 10 action steps to take and very easily get paralyzed.
Yeah, I can see that.
And the first time that I went, that was what was the case. That first conference in Dallas, I went and I was like, this is like drinking from a fire hydrant. Like, I am overwhelmed by all of the things and everything I want to do. And so from that point on, I've tried to be like, all right, what is the one takeaway? And whether it's an action step, but it's usually a theme, like a theme that's run throughout it, and then there's a natural action step as a result of that. And so, like, from the conference in Dallas this spring in March, if you remember, if you haven't listened to that episode, it was, I think it's called the one about the fit life. I think that was the one that we talked about. But this was the concept of the fit life was like, I articulated that as a result of that conference based on Ramit Sethi's Rich Life. And my takeaway from that was like, I need to work less. Like, that was my takeaway, was more time with my kids. And that kind of played itself into this weekend as well, but it was kind of taken one step further.
Okay.
So, couple things off the top, and then we'll kind of get into the meat of it. So, one, there's a reason I've gone to 5 of these in the last 18 months, and I'm going to another one in a month. I will go to 6 in not even in a year and a half. We are a product of the people that we surround ourselves with. And there's no substitution for in-person relationship by any stretch of the imagination.
That's true.
And there are people who I was internet friends with, right? Like, I had messaged over the internet, but I have seen them in person now 5 times in the last 18 months and have developed real relationships with, to the point where I would have like a genuine conversation with them about whatever. Now, we're going to talk about certain things versus other things that I would talk about with different friends or different people, or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not necessarily asking these people for advice on my marriage.
Yeah, it's like almost situational friends.
100%. But like, we can very easily hang out, have a good time, talk about real stuff, talk about business, talk about fitness, talk about whatever. And it's very natural. And I look forward to seeing them. So that's kind of point number 1. So this is why we talk about going to the gym. and there's value in, if you can swing it, becoming part of the gym community versus working out at home. Now, that's not to say that there's not value in working out at home, like action, the logistics of, hey, I can work out in front of my kids and so they can see me. There's less barriers to entry. All of those things are very true. But I always get a better workout in when even if I'm in a room working out by myself, but there's other people in the room. Like if I'm working out at Pack, I'm going to get a better workout in than I'm working out at here. Yeah. Almost 100% of the time.
Do you think it's because, like, even if you're not quote unquote competing with anyone, you're almost like, other people are watching me, I need to make sure that I'm stepping it up a little?
Or you see somebody else doing something well and that encourages you. Like the cliche of a rising tide lifts all boats. Like it helps if you're in the ocean, like versus in a pond by yourself. Like if you're in a space with other boats and you're going to see, hey, we're all going up together. Speaking of that, right? The fitness industry is one of the more unique ones in the world, in the fact that in terms of its collaboration, I feel, because people who are good recognize that we are not each other's competition. Like I'm not in competition with any of the other coaches that are there. Like there are 300 million people in the United States. We can't coach them all.
Right.
So we're not fighting with other people, other coaches. We're fighting with inaction. Like my biggest competition is Netflix. My second biggest competition is stupid people on the internet.
Oh.
Like saying that cold plunges are the key to fat loss and eating fruit makes you fat. Like stupid people on the internet. Like that's my competition.
The ones naming the actual chemical makeup of fruits, vegetables, water, and saying that those chemicals are bad for you. It's like chemicals literally make up every single atom on this planet. So
everything. If you see somebody in the grocery store saying this is bad for you, unfollow that person.
Yep.
There's no place for fear mongering. Although I might start doing it as like a spoof. There are people who do it as a spoof, as a hook.
Oh, just you could do it in front of the ice cream aisle.
And be like, this is going to make you. You'll go to the ER.
Do not do it.
At least don't do it 4 times in 4 days.
Yeah, moderation, folks.
Yeah. Jeez.
I think that could be a really funny post, actually. So.
Oh, I'm sure it could be. Yeah.
TM. I claimed it.
Yeah. You get credit. You'll get all of my $0 from the creator fund that I get.
You never know. Ben and Jerry's might really pick you up.
I don't think I have access to the creator fund. If I do, I don't know how to do it.
I have no idea either.
I don't get paid for anything I put on social media. So that is kind of, those are the kind of the top level things. But the bigger theme for me from this weekend was really quite interesting. And it wasn't one that I was anticipating at all, but it started on the plane there. And I'll tell that story, but I'm going to start with what it is. And this is going to sound very strange, or maybe not strange, but maybe a little bit out of left field. But one of my favorite verses in the Bible is from Galatians 6. I think it's Galatians 6:5, which is, "Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." Basically, you get what you pay for. You get what you invest.
What you put in.
Like the bill comes due. Like you can't, like, God will not be mocked. Like if you plant bad seeds, you're going to get bad fruit. If you plant good seeds, you're going to get good fruit. Like there's no, like, we're not going to, like, there's very rare circumstances where, like somebody wins the lottery, which is a really terrible investment strategy, but you end up, but like for the most part, but all of those people who win the lottery lose all their money because they didn't have the right.
Right.
Yes.
They know how to manage it.
100%. So this is the premise, which is like every bill comes due, somebody has to pay it. And we get to choose what we're planting and what we're harvesting. And so I could weave that theme into like, hey, I have put in the cost of like going to a lot of these, and there has been a good fruit in my business. Like that's kind of top level. You could think about that. But it goes a lot deeper than that. And I think that there's a lesson for a lot of us in this. So I sat diagonally. So I took 2 planes because there's no way to get to Edmonton without taking 2 planes. Like you have to take a connection. And I almost, little aside, almost made a grievous error in this.
Did you almost forget your passport?
No, I did not almost do that. But I made a good decision. So I'll start with the good decision I made and then almost a grievous decision that I made. So the good decision that I made is typically when I go to these, I take like the first flight out of the day because in my head, I'm like 6 a.m. isn't that early. And then I work backward. You did this last
time, my friend.
I did. You remember I did this last time? I was like, hey, your lesson from this. Like,
about it. Yeah.
I did. And I said it was in my 23 lessons of 2023.
Yes,
like, don't take the first flight out, especially if you're going west. Because I have to, if I have a 6 a.m. flight, I have to wake up at 2:30 in the morning to leave by 3, to catch the 3:30 bus, to get to the airport by 5, to make my 6 o'clock flight. That's how it works. And so I was like, all right, I'm not going to do that again, especially if I'm going west, because I go west and we stay out that first night until 10 or 11. So I've been up for like 24 hours and I'm useless the whole weekend. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make a smart decision and I'm going to take like a 10:30 flight out.
That's a perfect time.
Which was great.
You're hitting rush hour to get
No, it was fine. Like, so I was able to wake up at my normal time, 4:30. And get the kids ready. I was able to drop the kids off on Thursday morning, like say goodbye to them versus like have to do it the night before. It was one less morning that Megan had to do solo with school drop off and everything. I dropped everybody off. I got to the bus at 7:30 and I got there and it was all fine. Took my flight out. Terrific. No problems whatsoever. Land in Toronto. So this was where I made the mistake. Because I wanted the 10:30 flight out, there were no connections with that 10:30 flight to Edmonton that got me there before like 8 p.m. Like I would have had a 4-hour layover in Toronto. But I'm like, there's enough flights going from Toronto to Edmonton that I can kind of make my own connection, essentially. So I was like, all right, I'm going to book an individual flight to Toronto and then an individual flight to Edmonton. That was my thought process. So I was like, okay, I'll land in Toronto at noon. I'll take a 1:30 flight from Toronto to Edmonton. No problem. Plenty of time to make the connection and buffer if we're late. And we took off like 10 minutes late, but not a big deal. I get there.
Carry on.
Good. Do the whole thing. Yep. Not going to play games, which is very grateful that I did because of this. I didn't register the fact that I had 2 different airlines. And there's 2 different terminals in the Toronto airport. So I had to leave the Toronto airport, go through customs, and then go back through security to get to my plane to Edmonton in an hour and a half. And I was like,
that's tight. That
got a little tight. I got there like 15 minutes before we were supposed to take off, and then it ended up getting delayed by 20 minutes, so I was fine.
It was fine.
But it was
stressful.
We had a little bit of like it got to the point where I was like walking down the stairs with my suitcase instead of using the escalator. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, we gotta move a little bit here. Like we're gonna not play games with what's happening here. But we got it.
Oh, my anxiety would have been like in my throat at that point.
Oh. We were moving. It was fine though. When we got there, and part of the reason why I wanted to take this flight is I knew that at least one of the guys, because a bunch of trainers are from Toronto, and I knew a lot of them were going to be flying out. So I was like, I know at least one of my good friends was taking that flight. And it turned out that like 5 people I knew were taking that flight. So it was cool.
I got super cool city. I wish you'd been able to spend some time in Toronto. It's a really fun city.
I have spent zero time in Toronto. I've flown through it twice, but I've been in the airport. At some point, I'm sure I will, because there's so many people that I know up there now that like at some point I'll go up there for just like to be in Toronto. But
how long's the flight to get to just Toronto? Like 2 hours?
Hour and a half, hour 45. Yeah, pretty quick.
You can do that for a weekend.
Yeah, super simple.
Yeah.
So get there, and then so we're waiting there, and then I get introduced to a guy who I had messaged with a couple times on the internet, but he doesn't really know who I am. He's got a pretty large following. He's been in the industry. He was one of the speakers this weekend. His name is Vince. And I don't think he'll mind me sharing this story. So his name is Vince Del Monte, because none of you really care who he is. Full disclosure, he's a fitness.
What do you mean?
He's He's a fitness professional business coach. So like, unless you're a coach, you probably don't know who he is.
Narrow
niche. Yeah, he's doing a specific thing. But he's well known in the fitness industry as, he's one of the longest running, like, hey, this is how you grow your fitness business guys. And so it was, I entered, we said hi, and then he sat diagonally across from me on the plane, like I was on the aisle, he was on the aisle, he was one row in front of me. Mm-hmm. So we're doing the flight to Edmonton, and like, 2.5 hours in, he was doing his thing, I was doing my thing, like we didn't chat, and then he kind of turned around at one point, and he was like, "Do I know you?" Like, I was like, "Well, we met out there." He's like, "No, I feel like I was like, "Well, we messaged a couple times on social, but I don't expect you to necessarily." And I was like, full disclosure, it was probably your DM setter, not you, who was messaging me. You know what I mean? Like, there are people who have large accounts oftentimes have somebody doing their DMs for them. It's not universal, but it's not uncommon. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Yeah, so you're a fitness." I was like, "Yeah, I'm going there." And I told him that I, like, a little bit of like just to be clear, I'm not a potential client for you, like, sort of thing, because I work for another mentorship that is kind of quote unquote your competition, sort of thing. And he was like, "Oh, cool." Like, he knows John Goodman, who runs the mentorship, whatever. And so he was just chatting with me, and we were talking about business, and we were talking about family. He's got a couple kids, and pretty quickly, like alarmingly quickly, it got pretty deep. Not like alarmingly, but I was like, "Wow, okay, like, okay, like we're talking about very real things." And I was like, I don't know if this is just his MO, or I have a face.
It's you. People tell you things that I'm always shocked that people like. I'm shocked what I tell you.
That's fair.
And I know you pretty well, but I'm still like, oh, that came out.
But it got pretty deep pretty quick. And so he was talking, and he's gone on public with this. This is pretty common knowledge. He's done, videos and social media stuff on this, but he's had an unwanted separation from his wife for the last 2 years, basically. Like, she was like, "Yeah, I'm done." That's too bad. It is. It's a bummer. And you can tell, like, how much this has, like, rocked him from, because I didn't really know of him from a couple years ago, but everybody I've talked to about him, there's nothing that we talked about on the previous episode. I think the 5 things that are like the biggest stressors in your life are, and marriage or divorce is one of them, because it's like you are as united as can be, and it's not just a normal breakup, right? Like, your life was one, and they were married for, I forget what it's, 17 years, something like that.
Yeah, they've been every married aspect of your life.
Everything is interwoven, and then you're tearing it apart. Kids and how, like, it's just so challenging. And so you can tell, like, how much this has kind of rocked him a little bit. And we were chatting about it, and part of it that he has owned, and he said in his talk, even to a room of 100 people, was like, part of this was I pursued growth and growing my business and revenue to the point where I worked so much that I neglected this other thing. I neglected my marriage, and I thought that what I was pursuing was what we wanted, but at the expense of her, I grew this business. And so you have to decide whether or not, like he said it in his thing. He's like, I have a roadmap for you. If you want to make $1 million+ a year, he's like, I have coaches that have 8-figure businesses, but you have to understand that to have an 8-figure business, there's a cost associated with that. Yep. Like you don't get everything. You can have, whatever you want, but you don't get everything. And there's a cost. And he's like, this cost me my marriage. Pursuing $1 million months cost me my marriage. And I was like, oh, okay. Like that's as real and authentic as it gets. And so I had a lot of respect for him in that conversation. And again, I don't know anything about him prior to that, but like I respected that. But I said it to him on the plane. I said that verse from Galatians to him on the plane. In the context of that conversation, because he's kind of become a Christian recently. I was like, I feel like he'll resonate with this, but I was like, hey, like this is that thing, which is like, God will not be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And so you grew a $12 million business, a 8-figure business. You grew that. That's what you were sowing with your time, your energy, your attention, your efforts. That's what you grew. But if you invest in one place, the cost has to be paid somewhere. Like the bill comes due all the time. And so this was the next piece of it for me. We're not always the ones that have to pay the cost. Right.
I was wondering if that's where you were going.
We're not always the ones that have to pay the cost. Like the cost of him growing that didn't really go on him in the moment. It did later, but like in the moment, the cost of that was his wife and his family had to pay that cost. And he just went and did what he was going to do. And so when we think about the bill comes due always for everybody, we have to recognize, one, what is the cost? Because there's a cost to everything. Nothing is free. And who is paying it? So part 2 related to that from the conference, and then I'll kind of bring it all together. So there was another speaker. Name was Logan, who was there last year. They're great. And we're talking about, I'm going to try to be clear with this because it's not exactly it, but it was like how I interpreted it, right? Was we had to stand up and what are the 3 words to kind of define your identity, right? Like if you were, what are 3 words that define your identity, your values, whatever it is, and shared them with somebody. And I happen to be sitting next to John Goodman, who's the guy who runs the mentorship, who I have a lot of respect for. And so he and I were sharing back and forth, which was kind of funny. Yeah. And I said, faith, family, and fitness, like just to do alliteration, just for kicks and giggles.
Love alliteration.
Yeah. So those were the 3 that I said. And he told me his. And then the second part was we had to pick one of them and we had to talk about how that plays itself out in your life. And so I said, family, prioritizing family has oftentimes come at the expense of finances for me. And John said to me, he's like, is that something kind of in theory for you, or is that something you actually have to do? And I said, no, I actually have to do that because I work, and I've said this on the pod before, in a perfect week, I work 8 to 3, 4 days a week. It's not exactly that, right? Some days are a little earlier, some days, but that's what it averages. So if you're doing the math, that's 28 hours in a perfect week. And that started this year. Like before that, it was less than that. I have done that 0 times. 0 times since that was like, this is a possible schedule. Now we're into our 4th week. 0 of those weeks have gone that way. And it's just kind of the nature of it. Yeah. I don't know when I'm going to have a week that's going to go uninterrupted.
You're not. It's a part of parenting.
No, it's not. And I said it the other day. I was like, here's the thing about a normal week as a parent. There's no such thing.
No.
Like it does not
that
exist.
is the only normal thing, is that there's no normal.
Yeah. So I work even when things go perfectly, I work significantly less than maybe the average coach would, or my peers in the industry, or what I could work. Mm-hmm. You know, if I just said, all right, I'm gonna work till 5 or later, I'm gonna send my kids to daycare more often, whatever it is. Like there's a cost to everything. And I have decided that I want to, and it's hard, right? That tension is very real. And I've talked about this a lot. Like that tension is very real. Like I like what I do. I love what I do. And I think it's important what I do. And so I want to do more, but at the same time, I'm not willing over here to sacrifice this. So the cost of, but it could go either way, right? Like the cost right now is I'm not making as much money as I could. Mm-hmm. And there's costs associated with that as well, that aren't even just mine, right? Like I don't get to say yes to as many things as we would like to do. We have moments of like this, not uncomfort, but like, or discomfort,
it's
but like
awkward. Yeah.
It's like a little bit tighter, or like I have to be like, hey, no, we can't do that. Or with the kids, it's like, hey, we got to do this or we got to do that. Like we can't do everything, you know? And there are decisions that have to be made as a result of the fact that we don't make quite as much money. Like Megan has still had to teach, even though I think if she was drawing it up, she would like to maybe not be teaching as much, or at least have the option to, but she has to, because I'm not, you know, if I work twice as much, which is not an unreasonable thing. Like if I actually worked 40, because I probably average like 18 to 20 hours. Like that's probably what I average for work on a week. 15 to 20, something like that. So if I averaged 40, which is not an unreasonable amount of time to work,
no,
hypothetically, I would make twice as much. Hypothetically, like that's I might even make more, because my time has like, it's not just a linear thing, you know, I would be able to grow the business to the point where, you know, whatever. And so that's like, that would allow that freedom. And so this is a point where I've had to be like, okay, I'm foregoing this financial flexibility because I want to pursue this time with family. And I don't do it perfectly. Like this is not, you know, this is a little aside, but it's related to it's just something I think I need to say on this podcast.
All right.
So there's a book that I'm reading, and it's called Habits of the Household. It has nothing to do with fitness. I think I mentioned this. It's just basically like parenting, you know, in the chaos. And the guy who wrote it, and at the very beginning, he wrote a little bit of like, these are things that I have tried and have worked, but I'm not sitting here pretending that I have this all figured out. Like he started the book telling a story of like bath time and it's chaos. And he's like, this is it. And then we just like wrestle everybody and close the door. And then, all right, that's the end of the night. And he had a moment where he was like, I would like that not to be the last memory that my kids have of me from the day, you know, is like this, just like bellowing orders, you know? And so they started like a nighttime routine that is very intentional. And he's like, we still do this. There are still a lot of nights with chaos and bath time and wrestling and having to sit down too many times. Like there's still that, but we moved the needle a little bit. And he kind of signed it off as like, these are my tips. And he said, I'm writing this from the mess, like written from the mess, among the mess. And I've started to actually sign some of my posts that way, because it resonated with me so much, which is all of this is coming among the mess for me. Like things that I'm trying, things that I'm navigating, things that I'm figuring out. This is done among the mess. don't have it all figured out. Definitely had, from a fitness perspective, right? I skipped my workout this morning to nap because I was so exhausted from taking the red eye back on Sunday.
Right.
And I had way too many margaritas over the weekend. And, with finances or with my kids, right? Last night I got really irritated with Parker because he just kept on, being a certain way, and I snapped, right? Like this is spoken from a messy place,
mm-hmm.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have value. It's the mm-hmm. same thing that I'm pursuing in the midst of it. So mm-hmm. the theme of this whole podcast is this message that was rang true to me, and I'll kind of finish with how it's resonated with me as well, and plays itself out. But know that this is spoken from the mess. Just as a little aside there. So when I am talking about the decisions to choose family over finances, that is not done flawlessly. There are times where I choose one or the, finances over family in moments. Mm-hmm. There's times where even though I've chosen to spend the time, I'm not as present as I would like to be with the family. There's mm-hmm. times where there's bubblings of resentment, feels like a strong word, but like longing for, whatever, when I see other people being successful. Like all of those are very real things. And it's not to say that I haven't, but at least in theory, when we talked about last episode of the one before about like the fall and the seasons of change, like when I'm thinking about my big rocks, mm-hmm. faith, family, and fitness are the big rocks. Finances are a smaller rock. They're maybe mm-hmm. the biggest of the smaller rocks, but it's those things need to win in priority, and I just have to kind of keep reminding myself of that.
Yeah.
So John asked me that, and it was interesting for me to think through, like, no, I have had to make decisions, and there's a cost to everything. Mm-hmm. Coming back to this, like, I can't say that family is one of the three things that I identify myself with. Like if I was, the old Instagram bio, like everybody's like, hey, what are all the things, like lover of ice cream, and like that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It would be like believer, husband, father, coach. Those mm-hmm. would be the 4 words, right? And in that order of importance. And just as an aside, right? Like notice that I put husband before father. I do think that you're speaking from having talked to somebody who just lost their marriage. Pursuing your marriage is one of the best things that you can do for your kids. Mm-hmm. And that's my high horse, but I feel like a lot of data backs that up, and a lot of stories. It doesn't mean that, whatever. Written from the mess. Mm-hmm. If those things are true, right? Like if that's actually what I'm going to pursue, right? My family over my finances, then I have to be willing to pay the cost. And so the cost is whatever, the things that I listed, like I can't do as much, whatever, all of these mm-hmm. things. It's some of my comfort. It's some of our abilities to, whatever, get into the next house that we want to, or, mm-hmm. Go on vacations, or I want to be able to just anytime that Megan says that she wants anything, for me to just say yes. Like that's just like what I want to be able to do for, and this, she would hate that I say this, like for my queen, I would like to be able to say yes. You know mm-hmm. what I mean? Like that's what I would like to be able to do. And I hate having to say no at times. Like it's the thing that I really, really don't like. That doesn't mean that I don't like to say no, but like in the thing where she's like, I would like to do this, I would like to be able to say, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Like no problem.
Yeah.
And the big one would be like, I would love for her to be able to say to her, she's like, I don't want to teach anymore, for me to be able to say yes.
I know.
I don't know if she does. Like, she may still want to continue to teach, but I want to give her that option. So that's the cost. And it's not just me that has to pay that cost, but there's a cost to that. But we have kind of decided that my presence, you know, and being around more and all of that is worth that cost. And so I've had to count the cost, and the bill comes due. Like, it's easy to say that something matters to you until the rubber meets the road, until you're faced with the situation. So like, it's easy for me to say like my family is more important than my finances. Mm-hmm. But when I'm given the choice of like, okay, I literally am going to have to turn down potential, like an example of this. And this is a very light example, but an example of how this has had to play out is not this past winter, but the winter before. So it would have been 22, 23 winter. And every winter prior to that, I had done, that's the biggest time for youth strength and conditioning training that I used to do at the gym. Summer is a little waffly because everybody's on vacation, but like from November until March, I could do after school training of athletes. And from a financial perspective, it was one of the bigger things that I did at the gym all year. Like, if you took that out, my income reduced by like a third for the year from what I was doing. Like, it was a large thing when I was doing in-person stuff. But what ended up happening was it was Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I would be gone until like 6 p.m. So Megan would come home. She would have to get all the kids. She would get them home. She'd have to do dinner. And I would walk in at 6 p.m. for the worst hour of the day. Let's all be honest.
Easily.
And she had been teaching other people's kids all day. And then she had to come home and do all of this. And then, so the cost for her was, you know, her sanity. But like, she wasn't able to work out as much because that was when she could work out, was in the evenings. But I wasn't home in the evenings. So she couldn't do what she wanted to do. Time with the kids, right? They were like dysregulated because I wasn't really around, and you know, it's helpful there. She had to catch all of it. My mom and her mom had to catch more of it because they would be a little bit later or whatever it is, or come over and help and all of these things. And it was for 4 months. It was like 4.5 months that this was the case, 3 nights a week. And you know, I'm not going to put numbers to it, but it wasn't an inconsequential amount of money. But at the end of that season, I mean, I knew it in the middle of it, and she didn't want to say like, hey, please don't do that again. But it was like, hey, in case you weren't aware, which I was, but like, in case you weren't aware, this is really hard for us that you're not home as much. For a long time. Like, it's one thing to do it for a few weeks, but like for a third of the year to do that. And in the worst part of the year too, like, let's just like, it's not like she could go take them for a walk and it was dark at 4 p.m. and cold, and it's not like she can take them for a walk or get out of the house or go do an activity. It's just like, we're just stuck in the house. And at the time, the twins were 1 and Levi was 2.5.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's not a fun thing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that 4.5 and 3 is significantly easier. It's just a different kind of hard.
It's always a different kind of hard.
Finish that year in March of 23 and said, I will not do it again. And so the last couple of years, I've had a coach, or last year I had a coach kind of do it for me. And so he gets like half, but it also reduced significantly, because this is going to sound really egotistical, but I don't think it's the case. People wanted to work with me. Yeah. Like, the kids wanted to come and work with me because I had built the relationship equity. And also, like, it was my name on the program. You know, like, it was what I had built over the course of years, and I had the relationships. And so it also, not in addition to like the bottom line was getting cut out because I had to pay the coach. The top line reduced because we didn't have as many people come in because they didn't want to. And also, he wasn't as available. Mm-hmm. And so instead of having it 3 days a week, we had it 2 days a week. And so we took a not inconsequential financial step back for that decision. Mm-hmm. And I don't regret that decision at all. But that was a moment where it was like, okay, this is costing my family something that we're not willing to pay. Mm-hmm. Particularly something I don't want to have to make Megan and my kids pay. Mm-hmm. Because will not be mocked. Man reaps what he sows. Mm-hmm. I was putting time into something else. And so what suffered was, it took Megan and I, and I'm not saying that like we were in, at all. It took us like 3 months after that to get back to a point where it was like we were good and mm-hmm. not just like ships passing in the night and like, like, all right, I need this, you need, like, we were just like existing and co-parenting together for that period. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is not worth it.
No,
it's not worth it.
Not.
So it's an example of, okay, if you want finances, oftentimes the cost is, I wrote this down actually. Hang on, let me put this up because I wrote this out. I think I did it better when I wrote it out. If you want to be wealthy, you have to work a lot. Your cost is often relationships, hobbies, and health. Mm-hmm. If you want to spend more time with your kids, you have to work less. The cost is often financial freedom, flexibility, and potentially purpose outside the identity of being a parent.
Yep.
I think a lot of moms feel this, or stay-at-home parents feel this, where it's like my entire identity is wrapped up in the this title of human. Mom or dad, mm-hmm. or, is this. And so feeling like you have a purpose outside of the home mm-hmm. sometimes can be challenging. And so this comes back to this weekend and why this resonated so much to me, and it was kind of the theme for the weekend. We can't get the good without the hard, and somebody's going to pay the hard, whatever it is. We can't get the good without the hard. You don't get the wonderful things about being a parent and the relationship and all of that without waking up in the middle of the night, mm-hmm. right? Like the fun like my brother gets really cool moments with my kids.
Yeah, he's the funkle.
But he's the like my brother-in-law, like Grammy and Gigi, like they get great moments with my kids. But there's a reason why Grammy and Gigi get better moments with my kids than my brother does. They spend more time with them, but they also get more of the hard. Like they have to deal with some of the challenges. We get the best moments, but we also get the hardest moments mm-hmm. as parents. You can't get the good without the hard. So this weekend, the good for me was I got to, have some time away. I slept in a bed by myself. You know what I mean? I got to have some drinks, spend some time with friends, got to learn, got to grow, got to be challenged by, have really cool opportunities. I went and I did a workout with two of the speakers. They just invited me along, and they're both huge, like 6'6", 250 and muscle. And they were like, let's bench. And I was like, all right, sure. Cool. Like, whatever you say. And they're like, you can, like, what are you? And they were all at the end. I hung with them. I was really proud of myself. And they were like, honestly, I'm impressed by you. And I was like, honestly, I'm a little impressed by me too. Like, I didn't think that was going to happen. But I lifted the most I'd ever lifted on a bench press. I haven't done a flat barbell bench press in probably over a year. And I went in there and I did one rep when they put on 275, but I did it. I did one rep at 275 and I felt really good about it. So that was it was cool. There were so many cool moments and relationships and brand equity and all these things that were the good. And I got the good. Mm-hmm. My only cost was I was a little bit tired, but I'll talk about that in a second. The people who paid the cost were my wife, my kids, my mom, and my mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. they're the ones who paid the cost. And it was hard.
Yeah.
It was, and it's been that way every time, but this was particularly hard because Megan had to shoot a wedding on Saturday, and we had talked about it, but like the reality of that, I don't know if either of us realized some of the logistical challenges of that.
Because that's an all day thing too, and she's shooting
all
a wedding.
Day.
Yeah.
It was really challenging. And so like, it wasn't, I thought I did a decent job setting us up for success, but you know, there was still a cost. And I couldn't pay it from across the country. I could not pay it. They had to pay it. And so they sacrificed for my good, what I wanted in that moment. And that was hard to come home to and recognize what it had cost them. Right? Because that felt like it flew a little bit in the face of family versus finances.
Right.
A little bit. And so that was challenging for me. It was challenging for me. But it's something that we need to understand, which is that there's a cost and we're not always the ones to pay it. So, like, where's the value in this for the person listening, you know? Like, I'll give a flip side example for this, which was, like I mentioned that I did the red eye back. In past years, when I've done this, I've just been like, all right, I'm going to take the first flight out on Sunday. But last year, I just flew all day Sunday. I got home at like midnight.
Yeah.
So it was the whole day that was just gone for me to travel. And so I chose to do a red eye back Saturday night. I got home by noon. I got delayed, so it was like closer to 1 on Sunday. And so I had the back half of the day with the family. Now, I've been tired for 2 days as a result of that, but that was, I paid that cost for that, you know what I mean, for that good. I chose that hard over the hard of missing the time with my family, and it has to align with my values. So when we think about like our fitness, right, bring it all the way back to this, okay, right, to be healthy, to be confident, to, you know, whatever your goal is, right, we have to take care of ourselves. The cost is oftentimes time to exercise, to walk, to cook your food, to plan your meals, whatever it is, money for a gym membership or equipment or coaching, a program, whatever it is. And oftentimes the cost is the flexibility and freedom to do or eat whatever the heck you want, right? Like, that's the cost. Like, you don't get to be healthy and just eat Skittles for everything. Like, you have to, I'm going to go one step further, you know, like you have to make decisions that align with that value. But if you don't, like, then the phrase of like, don't be upset about the results you didn't get from the work you didn't do. Like, you if you're not willing to accept the hard, then you can't be upset that you don't have the good, you know? But we also want to think about who is paying the cost if I don't. Because if I'm paying the cost, if I'm doing the work to be fit, for the most part, I'm paying the cost. There is some cost, obviously, with whatever, your spouse has to watch the kids or time away from that. Like, there are costs that you have to pay, you know, a little bit with that, but it's usually you're paying, or that they have to pay, but usually you're paying most of the cost for your fitness. But on the flip side, if we don't, who pays the cost?
Ultimately, your family and everyone who loves you.
The people who love you and you, right? Like, I hate to, you know, keep bringing this up, but you're on the podcast, so this is a good example. But like, the example that we give of M with swimming, right? Oh, yeah. Like, You paid the cost of some of the things that had happened in terms of like how you felt and your kind of day-to-day experience. She paid the cost because you didn't feel as confident, didn't want to go swimming. She didn't have the experience with mom. Then you paid the cost because that sucks, right?
Sucks.
Like that's terrible. Like
not anymore.
That's not anymore. But like, but that's the flip side, right? She gets the good because you did the hard.
Yeah.
She gets the good because you did the hard. You paid the cost, so she gets the good.
Yeah. Sometimes the hard is not just the exercising; it's the acceptance of like where you are in life.
100%. 100%.
We're traveling next week, and I've already chosen which bathing suit we're bringing because one of our hotels is like looking up at the Alps, and I'm like, there's no way I'm not going to go swimming in a pool that the view is of the Alps. Like I'm gonna sit in that pool, maybe there's a hot tub. Who knows? I'm excited.
100%. But that's the good that you get as a result of the hard, and like some of the hard is the mental piece that work that you've done. 100%.
Oh, God, working. I'm still.
We're always always still working. But the cost of not doing it is your kids. Like if I'm in your family, it's like, okay, my kids want to wrestle, which they do every night.
All the time.
And chase me around, Daddy, chase us. Daddy, wrestle. I don't always want to do it, right? But I'm going to pay the hard so they get the good. But if I'm not doing the things that I need to do to take care of myself, then that becomes a bigger hurdle for me. We have, we talked about on the last episode, Megan's Nana, who passed away.
Yeah.
Glennis didn't go to the doctor for 4 years, or maybe longer, before she passed away. Everybody was like, please go. Like, try. She just wouldn't do it because she wasn't comfortable with it. And so because she didn't take care of herself, like, I don't know how much longer she would have had, but I know it's more than what she had, right? Yeah. Like there's no chance that she couldn't have. And so we pay the cost. And I'm not mad, I mean, like you get to make your decisions.
That's right.
No, but like understand that like, and we don't control everything, right? Like, there's fluke stuff and people who get sick that have no business getting sick, and people who don't get sick who treat themselves terribly, like, you know what I mean? But let's control the controllable a little bit and recognize that who is paying the cost for our decisions. And I think that, so I talked with a client about this last week, right? Who was going through, a decision with work, and trying to figure out, do I like work was like killing her. Right. And she's like, but I make good money for, and this is the cost versus the good, the hard versus the good. And her kids are kind of grown, she's got like, and she's like, I'm trying to do this for my kids, like that's kind of the glue. Like I want to have, money to leave them and all this other thing. I'm like, all right, first of all, like I feel like you've done fine, but like, I'm not sitting here. My parents have done fairly well for themselves. They're not, rolling in it, but they've done, they've made smart decisions. I'm not sitting here waiting for my parents to die.
God, no.
For the inheritance that I'm going to get. And if I'm reliant on that, I think that my parents would say that they didn't do a good job. Like for them, success as parents is not leaving me a giant inheritance, but rather giving me the tools to succeed on my own. And so there's a cost to that. My mom left a very well-paying job. She was at IBM in the 90s, right? Like VP of, I don't remember, like director of sales for IBM in the 90s, right? So like big friggin' deal. Left that job right after 9/11, which we just had, because she was stuck in San Diego for a week after 9/11. And she's like, I'm leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And she stayed at home for my whole high school career, middle school and high school career, my brother's whole middle and high school career. There was a cost. But the good, right? Like who was catching the cost for her making what she was making, and who was getting the good? And is that the transaction that we wanted?
Mm-hmm.
We went on less vacations. We didn't go out to eat as much.
Those are not memories that are going to stick with you. Having
No.
your mom there for your band concert or whatever.
Everything.
Yeah.
That's the good.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to count the cost of our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to make decisions that align with the values that we have. So when we go back to the episode that we just did about September and what are the big rocks, right? Of the analogy I just filmed it of the like put the big rocks in, then the pebbles, then the sand, then the water,
Mm-hmm.
right? Put the big rocks in. What are the values? What are the 3 things that you're going to stand on the bedrock of?
Mm-hmm.
What's the cost of those things? Recognize that you have to pay that cost because there's a cost to everything. There's a cost to everything. You don't get the good without the heart. So you got to recognize what are we planting and what are we going to yield from that? And we only have so much field.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? We only have so much bandwidth. We only have so much time. We only have so much energy. We only have so much money. We have a fixed amount. What are we gonna plant? What seeds are we gonna plant? What seeds are we gonna sow? Because what we sow, we will reap.
Mm-hmm.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So if I would encourage you, if you don't already, do the exercise. What are the 3 things that you value? 2 to 4. Can't be more than 4.
Mm-hmm.
Can't have that many. What are the things that you value? What are the good? What's the good that comes with them? And then what's the cost? And who is paying that cost? And are you okay with that transaction? Are you okay with it? And then if you are, you have to keep coming back to that when everyday decisions come up. Because you have to make everyday decisions based on... It's a lot easier to make everyday decisions if you know ahead of time what the decision is going to be. Mm-hmm. Because the believer, husband, father, coach is going to make different decisions than somebody who wouldn't identify those 3 things. The person I'm trying to be, what would he do? What would somebody who values faith, family, and fitness do when faced with this situation? And you're not going to get it right every time, but every time you make a decision that aligns with those values, they firm up. And every time you don't, it shakes that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so this is coming from somebody who is on the heels of a weekend that may not have aligned with that, which is really hard. I'm not saying for sure it didn't, but it wasn't clear, right? It wasn't clearly I made a decision that aligns with those values. It was not like, oh yeah, that was 100% it. It was gray at best. So, and the feelings from that have hung out now several days later. Mm-hmm. But there is a cost to everything, and don't be deceived. Every man reaps what he sows. I hope that you are recognizing that the things that you're sowing right now are going to be what you're reaping. And just do a little inventory. Is that what you actually want? And if it's not, tear it all up, play it again. You can always start over.
Always start over.
But as Vince would probably tell you, if you keep going, at some point, you might not be able to. So make decisions now that future you will be proud of. Appreciate you listening. Hope this was valuable for you. If it was, I don't know if this felt like a little bit of a deviation from how we normally do things. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe this is just how I do things. But if it was, would love some feedback on it. You can shoot me a message with your thoughts. Or like, rate, review, subscribe, all those things. And I appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.